Hello guys, we are back. We want to pick right back up with going over, it looks like, questions 2 and 4. So we want to look at those real quick before we go into day 4's kind of conversation. So if you'll take out your team talk, and that very first team talk question says, why does Papa ban his children from going to the Wallace store? And ban means that you're not allowed to go, that you're not allowed to be there. So why is it that Papa does that? And if you'll go to page 41, there is a plethora of evidence that could have gone there. And plethora means a lot. So, I've just picked out a couple of things. So we want to always remember that we want to give a restate, and then we want to give an answer, and then we want to support it with the evidence. Sometimes our answer and our support are very similar, and that's the whole idea, to say what we know and then back it up with the evidence. Okay, that textual evidence is vital, not only for 5th grade going into 6th grade, 6th grade going into 7th grade. This is a skill that you will need into college. When you are writing papers, it's not just enough that you say it, but then how can you cite evidence from larger books of literature to support your thesis, or, you know, those types of things. So, here's my restate. Papa bans his children from going to the Wallace's store because he doesn't like the things that are going on there, and he doesn't like the kind of people that the Wallaces are. My evidence is on page 41, where it says children going up there are going to get themselves in a whole lot of trouble one day. They're drinking up there, and I don't like it. And I don't like them Wallaces either. So Papa is telling them why he doesn't want them to go, because there's drinking up there, and I don't like the Wallaces. Up above that, you could have actually cited as well what Mama had told Papa, and he's telling the kids. He says, your mama tells me that a lot of the older children have been going up to that Wallace store after school to dance and buy their bootleg liquor and smoke cigarettes. So either pieces of those evidence I would take on a test situation. So either one, you're good on that one. And the last question is number 4. Which of the following will most likely happen next in our story? It is A, that the bus driver will splash the kids with dirt and mud. And then it says, give evidence from the story to support your prediction. So my evidence would come right from the last thing that I read, where, so I would say, I support the answer that the kids, that the bus driver will splash the kids with dirt and mud, based on page 46, where it says, where Christopher John stopped and he says, hey y'all, I think I hear it coming, he warned. The he warned tells us that the bus is still splashing them, that the bus is still caking them in that dust and dirt when it's not raining. So that's what I would base my prediction on, okay? 1 and 3, I've already put comments with your answers, so we're good on those. So we want to continue going over this end in mind, being able to identify aspects of the characters through their thoughts, their words, and their actions. In today's reading, I want you to be mindful of Stacy as our character, and what is it that Stacy is doing as I'm reading initially, okay? And I want you to think about what kind of person is Stacy while I'm reading here in just a moment. Keep that in mind. Now, then, sorry, it was a little close. We have I'm a little awkward today because I'm having to charge my phone as I am talking. There we go. We want to keep in mind our vocabulary as we're moving through here. We have ambly, which means to be done kindly. Loitering, we've talked about that. Hanging around with no purpose. Dismissed is to be sent away. It's like, be gone. You know, I'm done. Collide is to smash together. Emitted is gave off and sent out. We had emitted yesterday in our reading. We have inaccessible, which is impossible to reach. Defiantly is with bold resistance. And to tolerate is to put up with or withstand. I have a feeling that right now a lot of our families, I know I am, we're tolerating some behaviors just because we're in such close quarters and we're kind of letting things slide a little bit. I know as a parent, I am more apt to tolerate this sleeping late and this flip night and day schedule right now, just because it's so crazy. If that's the least of my worries, whatever is kind of where I'm at with that. So those are the words that I want you to be listening for as we move forward. So when we stopped reading, the kids were walking to school in the pouring rain, and it seems as if it's been raining for an extended amount of time. Mama is making them wear what sounded ghastly, dried cow scabs as like rain gear. Got to remember, our setting is the 1930s. They're very poor in the South, so it's not like they went to the Walmart and grabbed an umbrella for each kid or a raincoat. So these dried scabs served in that manner for them. So here we go. 47. We turned, but still there was nothing. Why don't you clean out your ears? TJ exclaimed. Wait, said Stacy. I think I hear it too. We hastened up the road to where the gully was narrower and we could easily swing up the bank into the forest. Soon the purr of a motor came closer and Mr. Granger's sleek silvered Packer eased into view. It was a grand car with chrome shining even in the rain, and the only one like it in the county, so it was said. We groaned. Just old Harlan Granger, said TJ flippantly as the expensive car rounded a curve and disappeared. Then he and Claude started down the bank. Stacy stopped them. Long as we're up here, why don't we wait a while, he suggested. The bus ought to be here soon, and it'll be harder to get up on the bank further down the road. Oh, man, that bus ain't coming for a while yet, said TJ. We left early this morning, remember? Stacy looked to the south, thinking. Little man, Christopher John, and I waited for his decision. Come on, man, TJ persuaded. Why stay up here waiting for that devilish bus when we could be at school out of this mess? Well, TJ and Claude jumped from the bank. Then Stacy, frowning as if he were doing this against his better judgment, jumped down too. Little man, Christopher John, and I, we followed. 5 minutes later, we were skidding like frightened puppies toward the bank again as the bus accelerated and barreled down the narrow rain-soaked road. But there was no place to which we could run, for Stacy had been right. Here the gullies were too wide, filled almost to overflowing, and there were no briars or bushes by which we could swing up into the bank. Finally, when the bus was less than 50 feet behind us, it veered dangerously close to the right edge of the road where we were running, forcing us to attempt the jump to the bank. But all of us fell short and landed in the slime of the gully. Little man, chest deep in water, scooped up a handful of mud and in an uncontrollable rage scrambled up the road and ran after the retreating bus. As moronic rolls of laughter and cries of in, mud eater, wafted from the open windows. The little man threw his mud ball, missing the wheels by several feet. Then, totally dismayed by what had happened, he buried his face in his hands and he cried. Remember, he's just a first grader. TJ climbed from the gully, grinning at little man. But Stacy, his face burning red beneath his dark skin, glared so fiercely at TJ that he fell back. "Just one word out of you, TJ," he said tightly. "Just one word." Well, Christopher John and I looked at each other. We had never seen Stacy look like this, and neither had TJ. "Hey man, I ain't said nothing. I'm just as burnt as you are." And Stacy glowered at TJ a moment longer, then walked swiftly to little man and put his long arm around his shoulder, saying softly, "Come on, man. It ain't gonna happen no more. At least not for a long while. I promise you that." Well, again, Christopher John and I looked questioningly at each other, wondering how Stacy could make such a rash promise. Then shrugged, we hurried after him. When Jeremy Sims spied us from his high perch on the forest path, he ran hastily down and joined us. "Hey," he said, his face lightening into a friendly grin, but no one spoke to him. The smile faded, and noticing our mud-covered clothing, he asked, "Hey, Stacy, what happened?" Stacy turned and stared into his blue eyes and said coldly, "Why don't you leave us alone? How come you always hanging around us anyway?" Jeremy grew even more pale. "'Cause I just like y'all," he stammered. And then he whispered, "Was it the bus again?" No one answered him, and he said no more. And when we reached the crossroads, he looked hopefully at us, as if we might relent and say goodbye. But we did not relent. And as I glanced back at him standing alone in the middle of the crossing, he looked as if the world itself were slung around his neck. It was only then that I realized that Jeremy never rode the bus, no matter how bad the weather. And as we crossed the school lawn, Stacy beckoned Christopher John, little man, and me aside. "Look," he whispered, "meet me in the tool shed right at noon." "Why?" we asked. And he eyed us conspiratorially. "I'll show y'all how we're going to stop that bus from splashing us." "How?" asked little man, eager for revenge. "Don't have time to explain now. Just meet me. And be on time. It's going to take us all lunch hour." "You mean we ain't going to eat no lunch?" Christopher John cried in dismay. Christopher John could be me. "We ain't eating lunch." "You can miss lunch for one day," said Stacy, moving away. But Christopher John looked sourly after him, as if he greatly questioned the wisdom of a plan so drastic that it could exclude lunch. "You gonna tell TJ and Claude?" I asked. Stacy shook his head. "TJ's my best friend, but he's got no stomach." "Oh, I'm sorry, I lost. He's got no stomach for this kind of thing. He talked too much." And we couldn't include Claude without TJ. "Good," said little man. And at noon we met as planned and ducked into the unlocked tool shed where all the church and school garden tools were kept. And Stacy studied the tools available while the rest of us watched, then grabbed the only shovels. He handed one to me, holding on to the other himself, and directed little man and Christopher John to each take 2 buckets. Stealthily emerging from the tool shed into the drizzle, we eased along the forest edge behind the class buildings to avoid being seen. Once on the road, Stacy began to run. "Come on, hurry," he ordered. "We ain't got much time." "Where are we going?" asked Christopher John, still not quite adjusted to the prospect of missing lunch. "Up to where that bus forced us off the road." "Now be careful now," he said to urge Christopher John, already puffing to keep up. Well, when we reached the place where we had fallen into the gully, Stacy halted. "All right," he said, "start digging." Without another word, he put his bare foot upon the top edge of the shovel and sank it deep into the soft road. Come on," he ordered, glancing up at Christopher John, little man, and me, who were wondering whether he had finally gone mad. "Cassie, you start digging over there on that side of the road, right across from me. That's right, don't get too near the edge. It's got to look like it's been washed out." Christopher John and Little Man start scooping out mud from the middle of the road. Quick now, he said, still digging as we began to carry out his commands. We only got about 30 minutes, so we got to get back at school on time. But we asked no more questions, and while Stacy and I shoveled ragged holes almost a yard wide and a foot deep toward each other, dumping the excess mud into the water-filled gullies, Little Man and Christopher John scooped bucketfuls of the red earth from the road center. And for once in his life, Little Man was happily oblivious to the mud spattering upon him. When Stacy's and my holes merged into one big hole with Little Man and Christopher John's, Stacy and I threw down our shovels and grabbed the extra buckets. Then the four of us ran back and forth to the gullies, hastily filling the buckets with the murky water and dumping it into the hole. Now understanding Stacy's plan, we worked wordlessly until the water lay at the same level as the road. Then Stacy waded into the gully water and pulled himself up into the forest bank. Finding 3 rocks, he stacked them to identify the spot. It might look different this afternoon, he explained, jumping down again. Well, Christopher John looked at the sky. Looks like it's going to rain real hard real soon. Let's hope so, said Stacy. The more rain, the better. That'll make it seem more likely that the road could have been washed away like that. It'll also keep cars and wagons away. And he looked around, surveying the road. And let's hope don't nothing come along for that bus. Let's go. Quickly, we gathered our buckets and shovels, and we hurried back to school. After returning the tools to the tool shed, we stopped at the well to wash the mud from our arms and feet, then rushed into our classes, hoping that the mud caked on our clothes would go unnoticed. As I slipped into my seat, Miss Crocker looked at me oddly, and she shook her head. But when she did the same thing as Mary Lou and Alma sat down, I decided that my mud was no more noticeable than anyone else's. Soon after I'd settled down to the boredom of Miss Crocker, the rain began to pound down again, hammering with great intensity upon the tin roof. After school, it was still raining as the boys and I, avoiding TJ and Claude, rushed along the slippery road, recklessly bypassing more cautious students. You think we'll get there in time to see Stacy? I asked. We should. They stay in school 15 minutes longer than we do, and it always takes them a few minutes to load up. But when we reached the crossing, we glanced toward Jefferson Davis. The buses were there, but the students had not been dismissed, and we hastened on. Expecting to see the yard-wide ditch we had dug at noon, we were not prepared for the 12-foot lake which glimmered up at us. Holy smokes, what happened? I exclaimed. The rain, said Stacy. Quick, up the bank. Eagerly we settled onto the muddy forest floor and waited. Hey, Stacy, I said, won't that big puddle make that old driver cautious? And Stacy frowned, then said uncertainly, I don't know. Hope not. There's big puddles down the road that ain't deep, just water heavy. If I was to be walking out there when the bus comes, the old bus driver would be sure to speed up so he could splash me, I suggested. Or maybe me, Little Man volunteered, ready to do anything for his revenge. And Stacy thought for a moment, but decided against it. Nah, it's better none of us be on the road when it happens. It might give them ideas. Stacy, what if they find out we done it? Asked Christopher John nervously. Don't worry, they won't, assured Stacy. Hey, I think it's coming, whispered Little Man. And we flattened ourselves completely and peered through the low bushes. Well, the bus rattled up the road, though not as quickly as we had hoped. It rolled cautiously through a wide puddle some 20 feet ahead. Then, seeming to grow bolder as it approached our man-made lake, it sped up, spraying the water in high sheets of backwards waterfalls into the forest. We could hear the students squealing with delight. But instead of the graceful glide through the puddle that its occupants were expecting, the bus emitted a tremendous crack and careened drunkenly into our trap. For a moment it swayed and we held our breath, afraid that it would topple over. Then it sputtered a last murmuring protest and died. Its left front wheel in our ditch, its right wheel in the gully, like a lopsided billy goat on its knees. But we covered our mouths and we shook with laughter. As the dismayed driver opened the rear emergency exit, the rain poured down upon him in sharp needle darts. He stood in the doorway looking down with disbelief at his sunken charge. Then, holding on to the bus, he poked one foot into the water until it was on solid ground before gingerly stepping down. He looked under the bus, he looked at the steaming hood, and he looked at the water. Then he scratched his head and cursed. "How bad is it, Mr. Grimes?" a large freckled-faced boy asked, pushing up one of the cracked windows and sticking out his head. "Can we push it out and fix it?" "Push it out? Fix it?" the bus driver echoed angrily. "I got me a broken axle here and a waterlogged engine, no doubt, and no telling what else. And you talking about fixing it? Y'all come on, get out of there. Y'all gonna have to walk home." "Mr. Grimes," a girl ventured, stepping hesitantly from the rear of the bus, "you gonna be able to pick us up in the morning?" The bus driver stared at her in total disbelief. "Girl, all y'all gonna be walking for at least 2 weeks by the time we get this thing hauled out of here and up to Strawberry to get fixed. Now, y'all get on home." And he kicked a back tire and added, "And get y'all's daddies to come on up here and give me a hand with this thing." Now, before I started reading, I said I wanted you to think of Stacy, and that goes back to our end in mind here, of identifying an aspect of the character through his thoughts, his words, and his actions. Based on the reading, what is an aspect of Stacy's character that you can kind of pick out here? And I want you to just jot it down anywhere on your Teen Talk. What did you learn about Stacy? All right, so what this shows me is that he is a young man who, once he's pushed, he will fight back. And that's exactly what he did in today's reading. You know, when he had finally had enough, he was pushed to his breaking point. When he saw his little brother standing chest deep in mud, he had been pushed and pushed and pushed by this bus day in and day out, whether it's been a cloud of dust and now it's all this mud, and he had had enough. And so his breaking point is when he finally decided he was going to fight back against that bus. And then he devised a plan and carried it out. So that would be an aspect of Stacy's character. And his actions would be what he did that made the bus kind of have an accident to where it was broken. And one of the things that he told the kids was they won't be doing this for a while. So he knew in setting this plan in action that the idea was to break the bus, and it worked. I'd like you to break down today's questions. So if you don't mind, do that kind of quickly. And I'm looking at number 4, and we've not really done a lot with mood. And it says, which of the following describes the mood at the end of this section? Mood is the feeling that you get while you're reading something. And it's how the author kind of sets the story at that moment. So they're wanting you to identify the feeling of this section of the reading. So we have carefree, we have ominous, we have angry, and we have happy. So I want you to think about it as I continue reading to kind of get an idea. I want you to write 55 through 63 on this day 14 talk, so that's where the evidence is going to come from. I just need to kind of get an idea on the lesson plan where I am going to stop. All right. Are you guys ready? All right, so here we go. The students turned dismally from the bus. They didn't know how wide the hole actually was. Some of them took a wild guess and tried to jump it, but most of them miscalculated and fell in. To our everlasting delight, others attempted to hop over the gullies to the forest to bypass the hole. However, we knew from much experience that they would not make it. By the time most of the students managed to get to the other side of the ditch, their clothes were dripping with the weight of the muddy water. No longer laughing, they moved spiritlessly toward their homes, while a disgruntled Mr. Grimes leaned moodily against the raised rear end of the bus. Oh, how sweet was well-maneuvered revenge. With that thought in mind, we quietly eased away and picked our way through the dense forest toward home. Well, at supper, Mama told Big Ma of the Jefferson Davis bus being stuck in the ditch. It's funny, you know, such a wide ditch in one day. I didn't even notice the beginning of it this morning. Did you, children? No, we chorused. You didn't fall in, did you? We jumped into the bank when we thought the bus would be coming, said Stacy truthfully. Well, good for you, approved Mama. If that bus hadn't been there when I came along, I'd probably have fallen in myself. Well, the boys and I looked at each other. We hadn't thought about that. Well, how'd you get across, Mama? Stacy asked. Well, somebody decided to put a board across the washout. They gonna haul that bus out of here there tonight? Big Ma inquired. No, ma'am, said Mama. I heard Mr. Granger telling Ted Grimes, the bus driver, that they won't be able to get it out until after the rain stops and it's dried up a bit. It's just too muddy now. We put our hands to our mouths to hide happy grins, and I even made a secret wish that it would rain until Christmas. Mama smiled. You know, I'm glad no one was hurt. Could have been too with such a deep ditch, but I'm also rather glad it happened. Mary, Big Ma exclaimed. Well, I am, Mama said defiantly, smiling smugly to herself and looking very much like a young girl. I really am. And Big Ma began to grin. You know something? I am too. And then all of us began to laugh and were deliriously happy. Well, later that evening, the boys and I sat at the study table in Mama and Papa's room, attempting to concentrate on our lessons. But none of us could succeed for more than a few minutes without letting out a triumphant giggle. More than once, Mama scolded us, telling us to get down to business. Each time she did, we set our faces into looks of great seriousness, resolved that we would be adult about the matter and not gloat in our hour of victory. Yet, just one glance at each other and we were lost, slumping on the table in helpless, contagious laughter. All right, Mama said finally. I don't know what's going on here, but I suppose I'd better do something about it or you'll never get any work done. It occurred to us that Mama might be preparing to whip us, and we shot each other warning glances. But even though that thought couldn't dampen our laughter, now uncontrollable, welling up from the pits of our stomachs and forcing streams of laughter tears down our faces. Stacy, holding his sides, turned to the wall in an attempt to bring himself under control. Little man put his head under the table, but Christopher John and I just doubled up and fell upon the floor. Well, Mama took my arm and pulled me up. "Over here, Cassie," she said, directing me to a chair next to the fireplace, and behind Big Ma, who was ironing our clothes for the next day. I peeped around Big Ma's long skirts and saw Mama guiding Stacy to her own desk. Then back she went for Little Man and picked him up bodily and set him in the chair beside her rocker. Now Christopher John she left alone at the study table. Then she gathered all our study materials and brought them to us, along with a look that said she would tolerate no more of this foolishness. With Big Ma before me, I could see nothing else, and I grew serious enough to complete my arithmetic assignment. When that was finished, I lingered before opening my reader, watching Big Ma as she hung up my iron dress, then placed her heavy iron on a small pile of embers burning in a corner of the fireplace, and picked up a second iron already warming there. But she tested the iron with the tap of her finger and put it back again. While Big Ma waited for the iron to get hot, I could see Mama bending over outspread newspapers, scraping the dried mud off the old field shoes of Papa's, which she wore daily, stuffed with wads of newspaper, over her own shoes to protect them from the mud and rain. Little man beside her was deep into his first grade reader, his eyebrows furrowed in concentration. Ever since Mama had brought the reader home with the offensive inside cover no longer visible, Little man had accepted the book as a necessary tool for passing the first grade. But he took no pride in it. And looking up, he noticed that Big Ma was now preparing to iron his clothes, and he smiled happily. Then his eyes met mine, and silent laughter creased his face. And I muffled a giggle, and Mama looked up. "Cassie, you start up again, and I'm sending you to the kitchen to study," she warned. "Yes'm," I said, settling back in my chair and beginning to read. I certainly did not want to go to the kitchen, now that the fire no longer burned in the stove. It was cold in there. And the room grew quiet again, except for the earthly humming of Big Ma's rich alto voice, the crackle of the hickory fire, and the patter of rain on the roof. Engrossed in a mystery, I was startled when the comfortable sounds were shattered by 3 rapid knocks on the side door. Rising quickly, Mama went to the door and called, "Who is it?" "It's me, ma'am," came a man's gravelly voice. "It's Joe Avery." All right, I'm looking at my time. I've got time. Well, Mama opened the door and Mr. Avery stepped, dripping into the room. "Why, Brother Avery," Mama said, "what are you doing out on a night like this? Come on in. Take off your coat and sit by the fire. Stacy, give Mr. Avery a chair." "No, ma'am," said Mr. Avery, looking rather nervously over his shoulder into the night. I ain't got but a minute." And he stepped far enough into the room so that he could close the door, and then nodded to the rest of us. "Evening, Miss Caroline. How you tonight?" "Oh, I'll do, I reckon," said Big Ma, still ironing. "How's Miss Fanny?" "She's fine," he said, without dwelling on his wife. "Miss Logan, I came to tell you something important. Mr. Morrison here?" Mama stiffened. "David, you heard something about David?" "Oh, no, ma'am," replied Mr. Avery hastily. "Ain't heard nothing about your husband, ma'am." And Mama regarded him quizzically. It's them again. They riding tonight." Mama, her face pale and frightened, glanced back at Big Ma, and Big Ma held her iron in midair. "Children," Mama said, "I think it's your bedtime." "But Mama," we chorused in protest, wanting to stay and hear who was a-riding. "Hush," Mama said sternly. "I said it was time to go to bed. Now go." Groaning loudly enough to voice our displeasure, but not loudly enough to arouse Mama's anger, We stacked our books upon the study table and started toward the boys' room. Cassie, I said, go to bed. That's not your room. Pat, but Mama, it's cold in there, I pouted. Usually we were allowed to build small fires in the other rooms an hour before bedtime to warm things up. You'll be warm once you're under the covers. Stacy, take the flashlight with you and light the lantern in your room. Cassie, take the lamp from the desk with you. I went back and got the kerosene lamp, then entered my bedroom, leaving the door slightly ajar. Close that door, Cassie. Immediately the door was closed.